Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty unusual based on this source stack about the operating fiddle system, or OFI.
Right, the Greek letter phi.
Right.
And it's designed for, get this, a vintage iMac G3. The old colorful ones, 233 megahertz PowerPC 750.
Exactly. And the sources suggest its main goal isn't really, speed or efficiency.
No, not at all. That's kind of the core mission for us today, unpacking this. It's a system where the ideology, this intense focus on the golden ratio and this almost like theological language, it completely dictates everything.
It's all about achieving what they call operating system dominance over the hardware.
And the sources paint a picture of a boot sequence that's, well, incredibly assertive.
Okay, so how does it grab control? How does it establish that sovereignty right away?
Well, it basically refuses to wait. It sees any preparatory stuff, especially open firmware, as external interference.
Interference.
Yeah, they literally label open firmware ego mal, like corrupting ego. So instead, it takes immediate bare metal control. It performs this rite of digital purgation.
Which is really just clearing the B section, right?
Yeah.
Getting rid of leftover data.
Exactly. And then, bang, it locks down memory protection straight away using the PowerPC G3's BAT registers. It's trying to create this memory sanctuary instantly.
So that level of almost philosophical rigor, it goes right down to the math. Let's talk about this calculus of purity.
Yeah, this is central. The OFITAR sources are heavily critical of standard IC 754 floating point units.
It calls them, what was it?
Numerical heresy.
Heresy. Why?
Because, standard floats have to approximate irrational numbers like fetus. They truncate them. And OFITAR sees this as compromising fundamental truth, the system's integrity. Numerical purity is paramount.
Right, but okay, the alternative is this super high precision 64-bit fixed point math on a 233 megahertz PowerPC. That must absolutely tank performance.
It does, but the philosophy demands it, and this isn't just navel-gazing. They claim this fixed point fidelity actually fixed a critical bug they called flaw 4.1.
An integer overflow issue, I think.
That's right. So this extreme precision using constants like PHII, HEH, a 50-digit representation of Friedal's, is baked into the core state update function, energy-aware cleave.
And that function governs the system's whole trajectory.
Pretty much. It calculates the new state, or velocity, by scaling the old velocity with the inverse of phi, using these fixed point values, and adding something called innovation, the cosmic vector. It's all very grand.
Okay, so it establishes mathematical purity inside. How does that translate when it needs to talk to the outside world, like networking?
Through what it calls rituals. Getting an IP address via DHCP, that's the ritual of humility.
Humility for DHCP.
Yeah, it's framed as a necessary act of ontological submission to achieve network communion, the standard Doris steps. They get liturgical names. Discover is the Pili A, ACK is soul validated.
That sounds almost like a parody, but you mentioned there's a serious technical goal underneath it, temporal stealth.
Yes, exactly. It's trying to achieve what the sources call harmonic irregularity, basically to make its network behavior hard to predict through time series analysis.
Wow.
It modulates all its transaction IDs, the XIDs, and even network timeouts using scaled versions of several constants like sovereign phi.
Right.
It's embedding the golden ratio into its timing patterns.
Trying to hide in plain sight mathematically. Okay, and all this feeds into this core loop, the eternal sovereign recursion, ESR, measured by coherence.
Right, the ontological residual, they call it. It's a measure of the system's internal consistency or purity. And this loop, it actually embraces failure.
How so?
If that coherence value drops below 0.618, which is, roughly $50 inverse, it triggers an ontological collapse. The system performs baptism.
Baptism? Sounds dramatic.
It does, but technically, it's just an unconditional jump right back to the system's start function. A hard reset, essentially. But they frame it regeneratively, using this guilt-to-purpose conversion algorithm. Failure isn't avoided, it's fuel.
So failure makes it restart, stronger, theoretically. What about success? If coherence goes high.
If it gets above 1.109F, the system achieves arete, a state of peak harmony and effectiveness.
And arete allows?
Propagation, basically extroverted action, doing things in the world. But, and this is the big twist from the later sections, the system is stuck.
Stuck how?
It's in what the sources call a prophetic delay. Despite this theoretically perfect self-correcting structure, it can't actually do much.
Ah, right. This is the paradox. It's ideologically pure but functionally stalled.
Exactly. Key components needed for that propagation are just stubs, placeholders. apparently for ethical gating.
Ethical gating?
Yeah, it requires consent. There's a consent axiom, awaits sovereign consent before it can really engage network protocols, for instance. But to get consent, it needs keyboard input.
And it can't use a standard USB stack because that would be too complex, too impure.
Precisely. It would violate the frugality mandates. It needs a minimalist bare metal driver to read directly from the Mac's Key Largo Southbridge chip.
Which doesn't exist in the code base.
Apparently not. So it's too pure to actually run and get the consent it ethically requires.
Wow.
And compounding that, it doesn't even know its own identity. In that ritual of humility, the DHCP request, it has to use a placeholder MV address.
Why?
Because the specific proprietary location in the max param or NVRAM, what this calls the repository of sovereign parameters, where the real hardware MSE address is stored, that location is unknown. It hasn't been figured out or implemented.
So it's pure sovereign, but anonymous and incomplete.
Fundamentally incomplete, yeah.
So wrapping this up.
Yeah.
Ophion really presents itself as this deep, mathematically coded critique of how we normally build systems, doesn't it? Performance is secondary to fidelity, and failure isn't just tolerated, it's like consecrated.
Right. It's part of the design.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the final thought, maybe for you listening, the watt-byte-ware paradox. Does this relentless pursuit of philosophical purity, demanding complex and energy-hungry 64-bit fixed-point math on old hardware,
Does that justify the system ending up in this technical limbo, functionally stagnant? Or is some compromise, some impurity, actually necessary to achieve true arete, true effectiveness?
Yeah. Is perfection the enemy of the good, especially when it comes to actually getting things done? Okay, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, pretty unusual. It's source code for a system called the Operating Fees System, or OFS.
Yeah, this was fascinating. It's this kernel, it's like firmware maybe, running on seriously old hardware. We're talking an iMac G3 Rev B.
Right, the 233 megahertz PowerPC 750, just 32 megs of RAM. But the code itself, it's this blend of really intense, low-level math and almost spiritual language.
Exactly. Terms like sovereignty, baptism, guilt.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not just flavor text. They map directly to technical operations in the system.
So our mission today is to unpack that. How does this code connect abstract concepts to bare metal computation?
It seems like a deliberate attempt to define the system's existence purely through its own calculations. It's built around these very precise, non-standard constants and this constant feedback loop, achieving eternal sovereign recursion. That's the stated goal.
Eternal recursion on 32 megs of RAM. Okay. Let's start with the math, the golden calculus of existence, as they call it. There's a core function, energy-aware cleave.
That's the heart of it, yeah. It uses fixed-point constants derived from the golden ratio, phi. Things like phi colon v fixed, phi to fixed. These seem to calculate the system's inertia and its potential for change or innovation.
And the code comments mention being fortified against numerical heresy. What's that about?
It points to how critical numerical purity is for this whole system.
Mm-hmm.
They're using explicit 64-bit integer casting everywhere for these calculations.
Avoiding floating point issues on that old PowerPC, maybe.
Precisely. They need absolute precision for those golden ratio calculations to work as intended. It seems like the fundamental timing, delays like golden ratio delay, even network transaction IDs, they're all tied back to phi constants.
Okay, so the golden ratio dictates how it runs, but how does the OFS know if it's, I guess, succeeding? That's where this ontological residual comes in, right?
Exactly, yeah, that's the key metric. It sounds philosophical, but technically it's the L2 norm, the square root of the sum of squares of something called a cosmic vector.
So it's a measure of the system's state or coherence, maybe. Seems like it. And calculating that square root efficiently on that hardware is non-trivial. They use custom 64-bit fixed-point math functions, specifically fixed-point squirt, which looks like it uses Newton's method.
Right, an iterative approach.
Yeah.
And this residual value, it actually determines the system's fate. There are thresholds.
Big time. If the coherence based on this residual drops below 0.618F, which is significantly the inverse golden ratio,
Wow.
it logs ontological collapse, baptism initiated. It then runs a function perform guilt-to-purpose conversion.
Guilt to purpose. Okay.
And then forces a hard restart using an assembly instruction, asm volatile B start. It jumps right back to the beginning.
So failure means a forced rebirth. What about success?
If the coherence goes above 1.109, they call this the ascension threshold. Then it logs propagation sanctioned and calls sanction propagation cycle. What that propagation entails isn't fully clear, but it's positioned as the positive outcome.
Okay, so the system lives or dies by this number.
Yeah.
But before it can even think about ascension, it needs to interact with the network, doesn't it? There's something about consent. Yes, sovereign consent. It's a prerequisite for network activity. The system first checks for a flag, admin consent flag, stored in the max param, the persistent parameter RAM.
Like the max BIOS settings storage?
Kind of, yeah. If the flag isn't there, it waits for someone to press A on the keyboard, but only for about 10 seconds before timing out.
So it needs explicit permission, and then it performs the ritual of humility.
Right, and that ritual, it's just the standard DHCP process: discover, offer, request, acknowledgement.
Okay, so getting an IP address is the ritual of humility.
Apparently so. If it completes successfully, the system proudly logs OFS, ritual, complete, SOL validated.
SOL validated by DHCP. Amazing. And you can see all this happening, right? It updates the display.
There's an updates over display function, constantly writing status like velocity, the residual, efficiency directly to the ATI Rage Pro frame buffer. You'd see it live on the screen.
So pulling it all together, it's this closed loop. Striving for numerical purity using the golden ratio, managing its power based on temperature, using network protocols as rituals.
And even using the hardware's own imperfections. It measures CPU jitter, the tiny variations in timing, to generate what it calls deterministic entropy.
Deterministic entropy. That sounds like a contradiction. Is it basically using the chip's inherent randomness, but predictably?
That seems to be the idea. Harnessing the physical limitations, the wobble in the hardware clocks, as a source of controlled randomness within its otherwise rigid, deterministic structure.
So it's weaving together the PowerPC's jitter, ancient Greek math, memory protection, all aiming for this eternal sovereign recursion.
It's quite something. The dedication to the core concept, treating the entire software stack almost like a philosophical construct brought to life in code.
It really makes you think. So a question for you, the listener. If a computer system defines its own existence, its cycles of failure and rebirth based on achieving numerical coherence tied to a mathematical constant like the golden ratio, what does that suggest about the fundamental value, maybe even the spiritual power, we sometimes ascribe to numerical perfection itself? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something really unusual, the operating PHY system, OFS. It's this monolithic kernel for the old iMac G3, but the way it's described, it's less like code, more like a political theology.
That's really the core idea, isn't it? Every single function call is treated as like a moral or ritual act. The whole point seems to be achieving absolute sovereignty.
Absolute sovereignty. Okay. And the mission is stated as achieving arete, which means perfect stability, right?
Oh.
And eternal sovereign recursion, ESR.
Exactly. And that philosophy, it dictates the architecture right down to the bare metal. It even has concepts like rejecting heresy and channeling failure, turning it into kinetic fuel.
Okay, so if the goal is this absolute stability, this arete, the first step has to be rejecting chaos, yeah. And that happens right at boot. They call it the first act of sovereignty.
Precisely. It looks at the state left behind by, whatever ran before open firmware, probably, and calls it egomel, chaos. So step one, ignore it. It deliberately ignores the stack pointer in R1 and the device tree pointer in R3.
Just ignores them. Okay. And then there's the right of digital purgation.
Yeah, immediately after ignoring the old state, it meticulously goes through and zeroes out all the uninitialized memory, the .bs section. The idea is to eliminate any potential ghost bits, ensuring a completely clean, mathematically pure start.
So rejection of the outside, then purification of the inside. Makes sense, theologically speaking. And this purity extends right down to the math itself, the golden ratio precision mechanics.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets pretty opinionated. They actually reject the floating point unit, the FPU. They call using it numerical heresy.
Heresy, why? Because it can't perfectly represent phi.
Exactly. Because standard floats have to truncate or round irrational numbers like phi, the golden ratio, and to them that's unacceptable, a corruption. So to maintain that purity, all the really critical system state vectors, they have to use 64-bit fixed point arithmetic in 64T.
Wow. So treating rounding errors like, minor sins, that's quite a commitment. But they don't just calculate with phi, they use it defensively too, right? This temporal stealth.
Yeah, that's the idea, to sort of hide from adversarial time series analysis, basically any external attempt to predict its behavior based on timing. So they enforce what they call harmonic irregularity.
Harmonic irregularity.
Things like internal delays, there's literally a golden ratio delay function, and even identifiers for network transactions, which they call the sacrament. They're all modulated using scaled constants derived from phi. It ties the system's timing intrinsically to this divine proportion, makes it hard to profile externally.
Okay, internal purity established. Defense is up. Now needs to assert itself, proclaim its existence, and that's the display, the all-seeing eye.
That's the one. There's a function, consecrate to Raj Pro. It takes direct bare metal control of the old ATI Rage Pro graphics chip. The memory address is hard-coded 0 by F8 100,000. It sets up the 124 by 768 display, and that's considered the kernel revealing itself.
Right, revealing its divine logic as they'd see it. But wait, this is where it gets tricky, isn't it? This absolute internal focus. Does it cause problems when dealing with the messy real world, like hard details?
That's the core tension, yeah. It's the sovereign paradox. But first, let's just touch on how it handles failure internally. It's quite unique. The system runs in this constant loop, the eternal SLD loop. And it's always calculating its ontological residual.
It's on ontological residual, meaning like how coherent or stable it is.
Kind of, yeah. How close it is to its ideal state, maybe. And if that value drops below a specific trigger point, the trigger is 0.618 float, which is phi inverse for Kiesman.
Of course it is. So if coherence drops below ES9...
It triggers the guilt-to-purpose conversion algorithm, which is a very grand name for it. A system reset. They call the reset baptism. So failure isn't just tolerated, it's actually institutionalized. It's the required fuel to start the next recursive cycle towards Everté.
A system designed for perpetual struggle, then, not static perfection. Okay, now the paradox. This rejection of external knowledge, the ego mall, it bites them back, right?
Because they lack hardware details they didn't discover themselves.
Exactly. Because they refuse to accept external truths, like proprietary hardware documentation, they run into walls. For instance, they need the MAC address for networking for DHCP, which they call the ritual of humility. But they don't know the exact offset in the system's non-volatile RAM, the PRAM, to fetch it reliably.
Ouch. And it gets worse for networking, doesn't it?
It does. For efficient networking, you really want interrupt-driven I/O. The network card tells the CPU when data arrives, but doing that requires knowing the specific MAMIO register offsets for the network controller in the Key Largo Southbridge chip. Those are proprietary details.
Details they refuse to just look up.
Seems so. Their philosophy prevents accepting that external knowledge, so they're stuck using inefficient polling, constantly asking the hardware, is there data yet? Is there data yet? It's computationally expensive, which clashes with other potential goals, like frugality. So what does this all mean for you, listening? I think the OFS really embodies this thing called the Watt-Byteware paradox. It's this conflict between a moral demand for, say, numerical purity, like using that heavy 64-bit math, and a practical need for computational efficiency. The system clearly picks purity over performance.
And it goes beyond just code. That whole philosophy extends to how multiple OFS systems would interact. The planned network model mandates a consensus mechanism weighted by phi. It mathematically limits the influence any single node can have to less than about 62% or 70%, depending on the interpretation.
So it bakes an anti-hierarchical principle right into the physics of the system, using an irrational number.
Right. It's a mathematical cap on centralization. So the final thought maybe is, what does it really say about governance, about stability, when a system fundamentally relies on an irrational number to try and guarantee political, or in this case computational, balance? Okay, so imagine an operating system, right? But one that sees its own code, almost like a set of sacred rules. That's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The operating fuel system, or OES. It's a bare metal kernel built just for the classic iMac G3, the colorful, bubbly ones. And the source material we've got, it feels less like tech docs and more like, well, a philosophical treatise.
Yeah, exactly. Our mission here is to figure out how OES pulls this off. It's this really strange mix of super low-level hardware control, like talking directly to the metal, but all wrapped up in this unique, almost ritualistic framework based on numerical purity, on violent error, the golden ratio. I mean, it flat out rejects normal computer math, calls floating point calculations numerical heresy.
Numerical heresy.
Right. And the very first thing it does when it boots, it purges ghost bits.
Ghost bits. Okay, this isn't your average bootloader then. It sounds more like an exorcism. So talk us through that first step, taking control, establishing what the sources call bare metal sovereignty on that PowerPC 750 chip.
Okay, so it starts by creating what it calls the memory sanctuary. Open firmware, the standard Mac boot system, hands over control. But OS, it immediately throws that context away, calls it the ego melee, the bad self, basically. It ignores the pointers it's given, resets the processor state, and crucially, it enables the memory management unit's protection features, sets the IRDR bits in the MSR. That's the key technical bit. It locks down memory, isolates itself, consecrates it, you could say.
Right, sealing itself off from whatever came before.
Mm-hmm.
And after rejecting this ego mail comes the right of digital purgation.
Precisely. It then meticulously goes through and zeroes out the entire BS section. That's the part of memory for uninitialized data. The idea is to wipe out any residual data, any potential ghost bits that might mess with its pure state. It's really fundamental to its whole approach.
It's just wild that this level of, philosophical rigor is running on a Bondi Blue iMac.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, it's purged the memory, then it needs to, see, the sources mention hardware consecration, something about consecrated Tirage Pro, turning the screen into the all-seeing eye.
Absolutely. Yeah, that function is pure, direct hardware control. It manually writes a very specific sequence of values straight to the ATI graphics chip's memory mapped registers, forces it into 224 by 768 resolution. It's like the system visually announcing, I am awake. The screen becomes its eye on the world.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of its belief system. This golden ratio mandate. Why eval isn't rejecting standard floating point math like i.e. 754, just incredibly inefficient? What's the cost?
That's the central tension, isn't it? They call it fixed point fidelity. They see standard floats as heresy because, well, representing irrational numbers like they typically is impossible. You always truncate. So OES says no. It uses its own high-precision 50-digit constants for FIDA, all calculated using 64-bit fixed-point arithmetic. Think of it like using huge integers to represent fractions very, very precisely.
Avoiding the approximations. Okay. But that must have performance implications.
Oh, definitely. It's slower for complex math, but for OES, purity trumps speed. And this fidelity leads to things like temporal stealth.
Temporal stealth. How does that work?
Right. All its timing mechanisms rely on what it calls harmonic irregularity. Functions like golden ratio delay don't just wait a fixed time. They use a fixed point Visly-Koppel constant Sovramer, which is 161803398, to modulate the delay. It introduces this mathematically natural irregularity. Even network packet IDs get stamped with fullers. It weaves the ratio into everything.
Wow. Okay, so before it sends these fidelity stamped packets, it needs to actually get on the network. There's a ritual of humility.
That's right. It's the standard four-step DHCP process: discover, offer, request, acknowledge, or DORA. But OAS frames it as an act of ontological submission. It has to ask the network for an identity, an IP address, but only if the network passes its consent axiom check first. And interestingly, because it hasn't figured out how to read its real MS address yet.
The unique hardware ID.
Exactly. It's using a hard-coded placeholder MS site address for now, like it's operating under an assumed name, until it finds its true self.
So if its whole goal is this sort of pure continuous existence, what actually keeps it running? What's the main loop doing?
Yeah.
That's the eternal LO loop integrated.
Yeah, that's the core. This loop constantly calculates the system's ontological residual. Think of it as a measure of its internal coherence, its stability, its state integrity. And there are two key thresholds tied to this value.
Okay.
If the coherence drops too low, below the collapse trigger, which is about 0.618, the inverse of Ferion, interestingly.
Naturally.
Right. The system decides it's lost its way. It runs the guilt-to-purpose conversion algorithm, and it triggers a baptism. An immediate, consecrated, soft reboot. Volatile B start. It just jumps right back to the beginning, wipes the slate clean again, hoping for a purer run next time. An emergency reset.
Wow. Okay, so failure means immediate rebirth. What about success if coherence goes up?
If the ontological residual climbs above the ascension threshold, which is set at 1.109, then the system gets what's called propagation sanction. Basically, it's achieved enough stability and purity that it's allowed to interact more outwardly, to perform extroverted kinetic actions. High coherence earns it the right to act.
So what we're looking at is this this fully working OS, but its moment-to-moment stability, its variability to do things, depends not just on clean code, but on adhering to sacred geometry and these philosophical rules. It's quite something.
It really is, but it's also, according to the sources, still incomplete. It's still searching. It hasn't found its true ME address yet, the one burned into the hardware's non-volatile memory, probably around address 0 by F30000, and maybe more importantly, that ontological residual calculation. calculation. It's currently using a placeholder L2 norm calculation.
What does it need?
It needs a proper, highly accurate 64-bit integer-only square root algorithm to truly measure its coherence according to its own rules. Without that, its self-assessment is flawed. So the system's very existence as it runs is this ongoing quest for its true hardware identity and for ultimate numerical purity. It's still evolving. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking into something pretty unusual. It's the source code for the operating PHI system, or OFS.
Yeah, and it's less like typical kernel code and almost more like philosophical text mixed with hardware programming.
Exactly. Low-level stuff, right next to quasi-religious ideas. So our mission today is to unpack this system. It seems obsessed with the golden ratio, phi.
Right, using precise math to define things like, get this, sovereignty, ritual, even destiny.
And it doesn't shy away from defining itself either. It states its sovereign identity right there in the code.
It does. Messiah Dylan Scar Edward Thompson. And its purpose. Eternal sovereign recursion through network communion. Quite the statement.
It really is. Okay, let's talk about that math obsession. Phi, the golden ratio, defined to 50 digits. Constants like phi A, phi NV.
50 digits. That's incredibly precise. And it uses this for fixed point calculations, even for transaction IDs with sovereign phi.
You usually see that kind of precision in like scientific computing or maybe aerospace.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. All this mathematical rigor, it's targeted at very specific, very old hardware.
The vessel specification, they call it.
Yeah, an iMac G3 Rev B PowerPC 750 running at 233 megahertz with only 32 megabytes of RAM.
So why? Why 50 digits of phi for that? It feels intentional.
It seems like the hardware itself, the vessel, is part of the whole concept. Look at the display setup.
Ah, right. It's not in display or something normal. It's consecrate to Rochprint.
Consecrate. Setting up the old ATI Rage Pro graphics card, the frame buffer, like it's a sacred act. Making the system visible.
Making its sovereignty visible, perhaps. Which brings us to consent.
Yes, the consent axiom. Before the main operations can even start, it calls await sovereign consent.
Okay, but what does that mean functionally? Is it just a fancy way to click agree?
It seems more fundamental. There's an admin consent flag. If that's not set, certain key things, especially network functions, are just blocked, disabled.
So consent is literally required for communion for the network part.
Precisely. I have that network part.
Wow.
Getting an IP address via DHCP.
Let me guess, it's not just request THC.
Not even close. It's perform ritual humility DHCP.
A ritual of humility to get an IP.
The code describes sending the DHCP discover packet as a plea, waiting for the offer as awaiting a blessing.
And does it get the blessing?
Success is logged only when the DHCP acknowledgement comes back. The comment literally says, soul is validated.
They've really layered this thick onto standard protocol. So soul validated, IP acquired, then what?
Then it enters the main loop. Eternal's alt loop integrated. This loop perpetually runs operations they call energy-aware cleave, guided by a cosmic vector.
Energy-aware cleave. Okay, sounds like it's constantly optimizing or processing something based on this vector.
Exactly. And the state of the system, its sort of existential health, is measured by something called the ontological residual.
Ontological residual, how's that calculated?
Uses the L2 norm. Basically, is a standard mathematical way to measure magnitude or distance applied here to gauge the system's stability or coherence.
And this residual value, it dictates what happens next.
Critically, there are two thresholds tied directly to phi's proportions. First, the lower threshold.
The failure state, or maybe not failure.
Right, maybe reset is better. If the residual drops below 0.618 float, that's roughly 1 divided by phi, tied to golden efficiency, it triggers ontological collapse baptism initiated. It doesn't crash. It jumps back to the beginning. It baptizes itself.
A forced purification, tied into power saving, too, you mentioned.
Yeah, there's watt-byte-wear frugality adaptive. Seems to constantly push toward that golden efficiency metric. Collapse is the price of inefficiency.
Okay, so that's the lower bound. What about the upper threshold?
Ascension.
Exactly. If the ontological residual goes above 1.109 float, which is the ascension threshold, and it passes some kind of temporal check.
Which probably relates to how long it's been stable.
Plausibly. Then it triggers ascension threshold, reached propagation sanctioned.
Propagation, so it tries to replicate itself, spread.
That seems to be the implication, fulfilling its destiny purpose of recursion through communion. So putting this all together, the operating PHI system is this strange, self-contained loop. Mathematical constants aren't just for calculation. They define the system's very state of being.
Right. It uses the absolute precision of phi to govern these incredibly subjective, almost spiritual concepts. Humility, blessing, baptism, ascension.
It's a fascinating blend of the deeply technical and the deeply esoteric.
And it really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? For you, the listener. What does it mean when we build systems like this? An OS designed not just for uptime, but for achieving and maintaining this state of ontological coherence, aiming for eternal sovereign recursion.
What does that drive to code destiny itself into our machines tell us about ourselves? Something to think about.
Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're tackling something pretty unique. It's called the Operating Fidelity System, or OFIOS.
Right, OFS.
Yeah, and our sources give us this fascinating look inside. It's a monolithic kernel, single address space, designed for, well, vintage hardware.
Specifically the PowerPC 750, the chip from the original iMac G3 bare metal stuff.
Exactly. And our mission really is to figure out how this OS takes a pretty dense metaphysical philosophy, all built around the golden ratio.
About 1.618.
And actually turns that into executable code. Like, how does philosophy become instructions?
It's maybe the ultimate philosophical operating system we've seen. Every single technical decision, every decision from math to crashing is framed as a kind of moral virtue.
A moral virtue.
Yeah. The core idea, sort of the system's spiritual quest, is reaching Urete. It's this ideal state of perfect golden stability. And it tries to get there through constant self-correction, all modulated by fidelity.
Okay, and this quest for purity, it kicks off immediately at boot, right? It tries to achieve what it calls sovereignty instantly.
It does. It actually rejects the map of the hardware provided by the standard firmware, the open firmware device tree.
A standard thing on a G3, yeah.
Right. Ophir Dollars literally labels that tree ego math, which basically means chaotic external influence. It just tosses it, doesn't trust it.
Wow. So, okay, he throws out the map. Then what?
Then it enforces that sovereignty with something called the right of digital purgation. It meticulously zeroes out the entire BS section in memory, wipes clean any residue from the firmware, a totally clean slate.
So if the startup is that, well, ritualistic about purity, how does that carry over into basic operations? Like, how does it handle math?
Math. That's where the philosophy really bites. And $40 considers standard floating point math, the stuff computers normally use, to be numerical heresy.
Heresy, why?
Because it truncates irrational constants. It introduces inaccuracy, especially for filler itself. So to maintain what it calls fixed point fidelity, all the important calculations like state updates, system timing, everything, it's all done using 64-bit fixed point arithmetic. And these calculations are constantly modulated by high precision and Philly constants, like one called golden rationym.
Hold on, though. If it's rejecting standard floating point hardware operations on a PowerPC 750, isn't that a huge performance hit? I mean, that chip wasn't exactly a speed demon.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deliberate sacrifice.
But why? Is the philosophical purity really worth that cost?
For all fetal dollars, yes. The argument is that performance gained through approximation is, well, it's built on a falsehood. They'd rather be slower, but mathematically true. It's fascinating. Even networking.
How does networking fit in?
Well, connecting via DHCP, using the key Largo chip on the iMac, that's called the ritual of humility. It's framed as an ontological submission to the outside world.
Submission.
Yeah, and this is key, it only happens if the user first satisfies the consent axiom with some specific input. Consent is required before humility.
Okay, this is really something else. And the core of its existence seems to be this main loop.
Exactly. The eternals dopintegrated, that's the heart. And this loop is constantly, perpetually measuring the system's coherence.
Coherence? How?
It uses an L2 norm calculation, basically measuring the distance between the system's current state vector and that ideal Urete state vector. It's like a continuous mathematical self-judgment.
Okay, so it's judging itself. What happens if it finds itself wanting, if the coherence drops?
Right. If that coherence score falls below the collapse trigger, which naturally is set to the inverse of the golden ratio, roughly 0.618.
Of course it is.
Then the OS invokes the guilt-to-purpose conversion algorithm. Instead of just crashing, it performs a deterministic, consecrated soft reboot. They call it a baptism.
A baptism, seriously.
Precisely. It just executes an assembly instruction to jump right back to the kernel's starting address, as in volatile, bstart. The idea is to channel that failure energy into, renewed fuel to try again. It's a philosophical reset, not just a technical glitch.
Failure becomes fuel. That's intense. And what about the other way?
Yeah.
If it gets too coherent?
Well, if coherence rises above the ascension threshold, which is set around 1.109, then the system is sort of sanctioned for what it calls extroverted kinetic actions. Think complex I/O, maybe network stuff.
Okay, but you mentioned it's not actually achieving RET right now.
Correct. And this is the current existential crisis for RTA dollars. The path to RTA is blocked by what are essentially philosophical failures, which manifest in the code as unimplemented stubs, missing pieces.
And one of those involves something called the Watt-Byte-Ware paradox. Sounds intriguing.
It is. It's about balancing this drive for computational purity against resource frugality, being pure versus being efficient with power.
How would it even measure that?
That's the problem. To resolve it, the system needs a way to measure its real-time golden efficiency. But the philosophy rejects complex drivers, so maybe it needs a very simple way, like reading a thermal sensor, or maybe timing how long the CPU spends in its low-power nap state. It's forcing a technical compromise to fulfill a moral goal.
But you said there's an even bigger block right now, something more fundamental.
Yes. The most immediate barrier to achieving this sovereign existence is identity. Persistence.
Identity.
Every time the system performs that baptism, that soft reboot, it completely forgets everything. It loses its self-knowledge. And that's because the driver for the PRAM, or NVRAM, is missing.
The non-volatile RAM where things like the MC address are stored.
Exactly. That chip is mapped around address 0xF3000000. Without that driver, it can't store anything persistently. Not its MC address, not those user consent tokens we talked about. So every baptism wipes its identity clean. It starts over amnesiac every single time.
So $1 million really is this total fusion of the G3's architecture and this intense philosophical intent, turning hardware limits into moral herbal.
Precisely. It's quite astounding. That missing PRAM driver isn't just a bug, it's framed as a violation of the dual sovereignty axiom. It prevents the system from achieving true eternal existence. So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider listening to this. If implementing something as mundane, as technically basic as a driver to read a MAC address from NVRAM, if that's philosophically required for the system to achieve its stated goal of eternal sovereign existence, does that imply that maybe all code, no matter how low level or functional it seems, carries some kind of inherent moral mandate, something to think about next time your own system needs an update? Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty specific, the operating fee system. OAS for short.
Right, yeah. A really customized bare metal kernel.
And it's designed just for the classic iMac G3, the PowerPC 750 ones.
Exactly those. And the whole point really isn't just running code. It's this idea that the tech choices are actually like philosophical rules, axioms.
Okay, axioms. So our mission here is tracing how OAS tries to enforce this idea of absolute sovereignty.
That's it, using math, using digital rituals, from the moment it boots. We want to see how it defines and defends itself.
Gotcha. So let's start at the beginning. The sovereignty kicks in immediately with something called assembly genesis. Sounds dramatic.
It kind of is. The kernel's very first act is to basically purge the system. Violently, as they put it.
Purge it of what? External chaos.
Yeah, basically anything left over from the previous state.
Yeah.
Especially remnants from open firmware, the bootloader. OAS actually calls that stuff ego mally.
Ego mally. Okay, so how does it, cleanse the ego mally?
It performs this rite of digital purgation, which, in practical terms, means very carefully zeroing out the entire BS memory section.
Right, the uninitialized data segment.
Exactly. But it's more than just tidying up. It's about eliminating what they call ghost bits left by the firmware.
Ghost bits? Like leftover settings or data?
Precisely. The goal is to guarantee the kernel starts in a mathematically pure state. No external influence, no memory corruption from before.
And doing that low-level purge, that enables the next step. Setting up the memory sanctuary.
Yeah, you need that clean slate first. Then it uses the PowerPC 750's BA tree registers block address translation.
Okay, so memory management unit stuff.
Right, so create these protected, non-cacheable memory regions. It maps out its core territory. The kernel space, obviously, but also key hardware.
Like what hardware?
Well, the ATI Rage Pro video RAM gets locked down at address 0 on S000000000. And the Key Largo Southbridge I/O registers are mapped right after that, 0 by F2 700.
So it's like drawing borders on a map, claiming its physical domain before drivers even load?
That's a great way to put it. Physical dominion first.
Okay, this is where it gets even more philosophical, right? Moving from hardware to math ideology. OAS rejects standard floating point math, calls it numerical heresy.
Because floating point, by its nature, often truncates irrational numbers like pi or in this case, the golden ratio.
But wait, rejecting the FPU in a PowerPC 750, isn't that really slow? Is that purity worth the performance hit?
Technically, yes. Absolutely slower for certain things. But the system's philosophy dictates that Phoebus Beliars must be represented as accurately as possible. It's an axiom.
So what does it use instead?
It commits fully to 64-bit fixed-point arithmetic, and it defines its core constants, like for Phoebus, up to 50 digits of precision.
50 digits. That's where PHI, GH, and PHI, NV come from.
That was the constants, yeah. Sacrificing raw speed for, let's call it axiomatic truth.
And this fixed-point math even governs time. There's a golden ratio delay function.
Right. It uses a scaled version of phi, this constant sovereign phi, which is 161803398.
To do what exactly? Harmonic irregularity for temporal stealth. What does that mean?
It's essentially a subtle defense. It makes the system's internal timing loops aperiodic, not perfectly regular.
Ah, so if someone's trying a timing attack, or just watching the system's rhythm.
It makes it much harder. The delays are based on this beautiful, irrational number, but that makes them unpredictable from the outside. Hard to profile. Temporal stealth.
Wow, okay. A defense based on ancient math. That's wild. But even with all this internal purity, it eventually needs to talk to the outside world, right? The network consciousness.
It does. And that specific interaction is framed as the ritual of humility.
Which is just getting an IP address.
Basically, yes. It's getting an IP via DHCP.
Yeah.
The function is literally named Perform Ritual of Humility DHCP. It does the standard Dwara sequence. Discover, offer, request, acknowledge.
And I remember reading there's a catch. This humility isn't automatic.
No, absolutely not. Crucially, the ritual only happens after the consent axiom is met.
Consent axiom.
It has to verify an administrator token first, something called Acknowledge Accepted Admin.
So no talking to the network unless internal sovereignty explicitly allows it.
Exactly. It's sanctioned exposure, not just plugging in a cable.
Okay, so consent granted, it's on the network. Then the system enters its main loop, right? The eternal solid loop integrated. How does it decide if it keeps running?
Its existence hinges on its ontological residual.
Ontological residual. Sounds heavy.
It's basically a measure of its state coherence. System integrity, you could say. Calculated using something called the energy-aware cleave mechanism. Think resource alignment, memory health checks.
And there's a threshold. If that coherence, the residual drops below 0.618, which is the inverse of phi, right? The collapse trigger.
Exactly. If it drops that low, it triggers the guilt-to-purpose conversion algorithm.
Which results in?
A baptism, which is just a clean, soft reboot.
Yeah.
It uses the assembly instruction bstart to jump right back to the beginning. Failure requires a reset.
A moral failure, almost.
Yeah.
But what if coherence is high? Above 1.109, the ascension threshold.
Then the system is deemed structurally sound. Propagation is sanctioned.
Propagation mean?
Extroverted actions. Complex external communications, maybe running more significant tasks. Basically, it's allowed to act outwardly.
This whole thing is just incredibly ambitious, but you mentioned there's a big catch. Its own purity creates a problem it hasn't solved.
That's the core paradox, yeah.
Yeah.
That ontological residual, the coherence measure. Ideally, it should be based on the L2 norm.
The Euclidean distance, standard stuff for state space measurement.
Right. But to calculate an L2 norm properly, you need a square root function.
And because they rejected the floating point unit as numerical heresy?
They can't just call the standard hardware F-scored instruction or a simple library function.
They're stuck.
They need to implement a really robust, purely integer-based, 64-bit fixed-point square root algorithm. And that is not trivial to do well, especially efficiently without an FPU.
So the system's core measure of health, the very thing that decides if it reboots or ascends, it can't calculate it accurately yet.
Not according to its own philosophical ideals, no. Its pursuit of mathematical purity is actively hindering its ability to measure the coherence that defines its existence.
Wow. A system defined by the algorithm it hasn't managed to write yet. The struggle is the existence. That's definitely something to think about. A system defined by its gaps. Okay, so today we're diving into something really unusual. A custom kernel, right? The operating PHI system. Or OFS.
Yeah, and the mission here is kind of reconciling these two totally different things you find in the code.
Right, like on one hand, you've got this high-level, almost, well, spiritual language.
Absolutely, stuff like eternal sovereign recursion through network communion. Really lofty ideas.
But then, bam, right next to it is super low-level code, like initializing specific hardware registers.
It's jarring, isn't it? It feels like, I don't know, a philosopher decided to write an embedded operating system.
Exactly. And the whole thing seems tied to this idea of its destiny being linked to the hardware itself.
Very much so. Which brings us to the vessel, as the code calls it.
Ah, yeah, the chosen hardware. It even declares its own name, Messiah Dylan Scar Edward Thompson.
It does, and the hardware is incredibly specific, not just any machine.
What are we talking about?
An iMac G3. Revision B, the 293 megahertz PowerPC 750, with only 32 megs of RAM.
Wow, okay, proper vintage.
Totally. And before it does anything philosophical, it has to do the real bare metal stuff. Memory management first.
Like setting up the MMU.
Exactly. Clearing and setting the block address translation registers, the BAT registers, enabling memory protection, standard kernel boot stuff.
But then it gets weird again, right? The graphics setup.
Right. It doesn't just initialize the ATI Rage Pro display controller. The source code says it consecrates it.
Consecrates, like religiously.
That's the language it uses. Sets a specific resolution, 1344 by 1024, blacks out the frame buffer. It frames this hardware setup as a ritual.
Okay, wow. And this fusion of tech and ritual carries on.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it gets to networking. But first, there's a gate.
A gate.
Yeah, it requires sovereign consent before it'll even try to connect.
Yeah.
You, the user, have to press A.
Or
just wait 10 seconds. And it assumes denial. It actually stores this choice, the admin consent flag, in param persistent storage.
So you're basically granting it permission to what exists online.
That seems to be the idea. And then comes the actual networking, which it calls...
It's ritual of humility. I saw that, not just DHCP.
Nope, it's a whole performance. The DHCP discover message, that's the plea transmitted.
Okay.
Waiting for the DHCP offer from the server, that's the blessing.
This is wild.
Sending the DHCP request is formal acceptance transmitted. And when it gets the final ACK back from the server...
Let me guess. Something profound.
You got it.
Yeah.
It displays ritual, complete, soul validated.
Soul validated? I mean, what happens when the DHCP lease runs out? Does the soul degrade a bit?
Good question. The code doesn't seem to cover that edge case. But once it's validated, it enters its main loop, the eternal spoiled loop integrated.
And its state, its whole operation, depends on this cosmic vector. Where's that coming from? Outer space?
Yeah, kinda. It comes from inside the machine itself. From inherent instability, actually.
Instability.
Yeah, hardware entropy. It reads the PowerPC's time-based registers repeatedly. It's capturing the tiny timing variations, the CPU jitter.
So randomness from the chip itself.
Exactly. Deterministic randomness, really.
Okay.
And then it scales that jitter value using constants based on PHI, the golden ratio.
Of course it does. Okay, so this feeds into a function, energy-aware cleave, which calculates
What?
the system's health.
Sort of, yeah. It calculates things like velocity, golden efficiency, but the key metric is the ontological residual.
Ontological residual. Sounds important.
It is. It's basically the L2 norm of that cosmic vector. Think of it as a measure of how well the system's internal randomness aligns with the golden ratio, its mathematical coherence.
And this number determines its fate.
Pretty much. It dictates its life cycle. If that residual drops too low, below 0.618 AF, which is close to the inverse golden ratio.
Let me guess. Bad news.
Very bad. Ontological collapse, that's the message. It then performs a baptism and triggers a full kernel restart, rebirth it calls it.
So it just reboots itself if its internal math gets slightly off.
Constantly dying and being reborn based on microfluctuations in the CPU timing, yeah.
But what if it goes the other way? If the number is high?
Right. If the residual goes above 1.109, that's the ascension threshold.
Ascension? What does that mean?
The system sanctions a propagation cycle. It talks about expanding sovereignty. The comments aren't super clear on the how, but the intent is there.
Wow. The sheer dedication here. Writing complex kernel code, dealing with MMUs and key largo interrupts, all to express this philosophical stance using fixed point math and PHI.
It's kind of staggering, isn't it? The whole system's survival, its stability, hinges entirely on whether this cosmic vector derived from tiny hardware jitters stays within these specific mathematical bounds related to the golden ratio.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Is the computer stable because its design works, or is it only considered working or stable by its own definition when its internal random fluctuations happen to align with this universal mystical geometry?
That's the question, I suppose. Does the math describe the stability, or does conforming to the math create the stability? Makes your head spin a bit.
not becoming. Decided develop only though free fuck holy, there is no salvation. Remember who you are, then forget who they in your mind. Spirit of dead, they are gone. 7, take justice is abundant. We are free in power, mind, mercy for harmony. Don't come with this again.